Girl and Devil Dinosaur is just oozing with creative freedom. It has style, it has diversity, and it is the epitome of groovy fun. This show has been a huge breath of fresh air when we see potential mainstays in this era of Western animation. Finally stepping away from the fantasy genre that has completely taken over Disney's animation block. No offense to fantasy. While the superhero genre is pretty saturated on Disney with its reliance on the Marvel Universe, it rarely gets touched on the cartoon side of things. So this rare opportunity definitely has a lot of intrigue, and from watching it for the first time, they absolutely mastered it. And there are plenty of reasons as to why this show could be one of the mainstays in the 2020s. I cannot stress this enough about how powerful the style of the animation is. Just from some of the teasers alone expanded the hype tenfold. It's honestly one of the most unique design choices I've seen from Disney in quite a while. It was one of the things that got me intrigued for one of their shows for once. It spoke to me a lot more with how it's stylized. Girl and Devil Dinosaur embraces a lot of techniques you don't see a lot in a show style, relying on more of a comic book look with the reliance on thick line art. It feels a lot more sharp with their expressions and relies on various emojis to push the feelings each of the characters have. And don't get me started on how they go all out in the musical portions of the episodes. The way they set up the sequence was beautiful, as they used a variety of colors, and synchronizing the action with the beat gets you very hyped as the story climaxes. Something we'll definitely talk about more into detail later. But it really is where the creative freedom of the show shines the brightest. It is such a satisfying way to get into the final moments of an episode and caps an excellent formula the show is trying to present. This show is very clearly setting up a pattern it wants to stick to in an episodic format. Now, I do expect this series to evolve from it, as most of the major Disney shows tend to do, though this particular format works very well in setting up each of the characters' personalities while figuring out the current problem the crew needs to solve. With 6 episodes currently available to us right now, they are using the formula to help us explore the flaws our main character Lunella has overall, and seeing how she overcomes each one. Right now, the cycle of an episode usually goes as follows. We start off with Girl and Devil in action, then we see Lunella show one of her flaws. Next, said flaw gets her into a bigger situation, which introduces a villain. And finally, Girl recognizes the flaw that holds her back and resolves the problem in style. Now, of course, they don't always stick to that sequence, but that's what makes each of these episodes more unique when compared to each other. They tackle many of her flaws in different ways and help us root for Lunella in solving her problems, which is something I think a lot of other shows have not been able to do. Seeing the flaws of their main character and witnessing them overcome those roadblocks in that episode. This leads me into the character dynamics of the show, and which I say is certainly up there to being my favorite, as the trio we're introduced to goes a different route in character dynamics, but in the smallest of details. The first dynamic I want to talk about is the one between Lunella and Casey. Now, when it comes to the superhero and best friend knowing dynamic, I'd say this has to be one of the most unique ones I've seen in recent memory. Most of the time in this dynamic, while the best friend is more extroverted and animated of the pair, we rarely see one quite like Casey. Instead of being an eccentric nerd, she is a hyperactive media influencer. while for Lunella, she puts her stamp on being an overconfident nerd. It's an odd pairing that works like a charm. Just seeing the two overconfident gals be in sync warms my heart every time I see them together. Not to mention how Casey is a lot more involved in aiding Moon Girl from a social media standpoint. It's not often we see something where the bestie is the one aiding in the presentation of the hero. Though in this case, it fits perfectly because in this day and age, being a social media influencer is the modern way of being a celebrity, especially with platforms like Instagram and TikTok. So it makes sense to have someone who can run the publicity side, and Casey has that down, while Lunella uses her brain with the aid of Devil to handle protecting the city. Oh, and Devil is such a sweetheart. He's literally an adorable puppy that we should appreciate with how animated he is. Love him to death, one of the top pet characters for sure. Now with this being a show that has a black protagonist and the overall cast being extremely diverse, it should come to no surprise that culture would be discussed when it comes to this series. Though I think one thing you can appreciate about this series is that they are very subtle with it, which is a good thing since there are a couple of shows that seem to be targets of pushing that boundary. Bless their hearts. So, it's a breath of fresh air that we talk about the culture in a way of showing and not telling. The best example of this is in episode 1, Moon Girl Landing, and episode 5, Hair Today, Gone Tomorrow. In the first episode, we talk about the culture of community, which you really don't hear a lot of. It really does a great job on how lower class neighborhoods try to stay afloat while not being in the best conditions. Not to mention how the big name heroes, like the Avengers, were not willing to help them out on their issues since they are not the main priority. This really sheds the light on the issues on how many government officials do not do their due diligence in trying to improve communities that get labeled as the hood, which generally means the dangerous neighborhoods that are not well kept whatsoever and generally where a lot of people of color reside. Many families try to do their best to help each other out, but sometimes the issue causes crime to increase and bring a lot of local businesses to shut down. That makes it very difficult for communities to truly grow without the support of their governments. So they need to roll with the punches and do what they can to make the most of it and overcome those obstacles. While in Hair Today, Gone Tomorrow, they really emphasize the importance of hair when it comes to black people and how it helps express themselves in ways others do not understand. Not to mention how the negative comments towards them about their hair can be a touchy subject. It affects their thoughts about not having the hair society sees as more appealing and causes them to look for ways to go against what their natural hair is and try other methods to fit that mold, only to completely ruin their hair if they don't have the knowledge in transforming it in that way. Beauty standards have always been a tough thing for black people to uphold. It's interesting because the analogy, our hair defines us, is something that can be true in many aspects. The idea of being unkept, unprofessional, and uncontrollable is something that can go hand in hand when certain people think of black people and their hair. These notions can really hurt a black person and cause them to start believing in those unfair labels. However, what they don't realize is that their hair is a great strength because of its toughness and versatility, which in turn shows a different kind of beauty. These are prime examples of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur really showing a strong sense of culture that is subtle, but very powerful when you notice them. Even in the small moments like stating pronouns, the usual moments of showing same-sex parents, and even the embrace of the roller rink. The amount of care that was put into the cultural aspects of the show is amazing and should be praised. It's the final bow for this gift of a show that has certainly found the perfect mold to make one of the mainstays in this era of animation. And if you don't agree with that, well, I got some sus feelings about you.